black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and I'd like to welcome you to part two of a two-part series. At the first part, I opened up with a video with Dr. Claude Anderson defining, to me, the best definition of what racism is about. But before I go any further, for those of you who are new to the Umoja Circle, again, my name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts when we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And I believe that in all true dialogue is how you shift a consciousness, okay? And only through that can you shift consciousness, through honest and accurate dialogue, okay? And that's how I function with this show. And when you shift consciousness, you'll find that your worldview is shifted also. And I hope for the last almost 29 years now I've been doing this show, that I've shifted a couple of people's consciousness along the way. And how I do it, I use history, and I use to put a light on topics that is happening in the present moment. And like I said at the beginning of the first show, the first part of this, this two-part series is about, I'm talking about what is racism. This is a word that is used a lot and falsely used, not correctly used, okay? In the last show, I had Dr. Claude Anderson, who defined it as more of a system. It is a competition between two groups of people at least, okay, where one group dominates and get all the wealth that's needed in a society and manipulate that society, since they have the wealth, to manipulate the politics, to manipulate the criminal justice system, to manipulate all that over another group to maintain their power. That's how Europe went around this world for the last half a millennium, the last 500 years, have dominated this planet, okay? They went out on their boats from Portugal to Spain, from England, Denmark, the Netherlands, France, and all these Western Asia, because that's, if you look at Europe, it's just a peninsula off the Asian continent, but they went around the world and dominated, okay? They would not, and it was an economic process, okay, and they dominated the world for the last 500 years. And to maintain that power, the economics that they developed during that period of time enabled them. That's when they colonized not only the Americas, they colonized Africa. They had the Belgian Conference in 1884, cut up the Berlin Conference in 1884-85, in which they cut up the African continent into the country that they're called today. Those names and those borders that you see today that's caused all these problems in the continent of Africa was created in Berlin in 1884 to 1885, when they decided to chop off for the wealth that was in the ground that's still coming out today, even in this modern time. Okay, if you have a lot of the stuff that is needed for our computer system still comes out the ground of Africa, not found any other way, any other place on the planet. And they've been exploiting that for years. Spain in 1492 had just got rid of the Moors in 1492 in Grenada, when they got the last group of Moors. But that's when their Cristobal Colon went out and told them about this landmass that he bumped into by accident. But they knew about the wealth of Africa, because before he went out across that water, to the Bahamas. He never made it to the Americas in itself. He was going down the west coast of Africa, where he saw his gold from what was left of the Mali Empire, and places like Ghana and what was not we would call Nigeria, the Ivory Coast. That's what they called the Ivory Coast, and they put these forts. So it was an economic effort, and it became wealthy. And then you had the church, the Catholic Church, on top of that, and giving them this imaginary right to control all the people that they run into that happen to look like me, or Native people, or Asian folks. So that's how this thing that we are talking about called racism came out. It is a competition between groups, and the group that's had the power and the wealth through this capitalist system had the ability to manipulate the system by laws to maintain the status quo, thus racism. Okay, so but I have a couple of statements that I'd like to go along with my talk today to make sure you understand what I'm talking about. My first thought is always this: you must always confront power with an informed mind. And some of the stuff I see online these days got me concerned, because some of that stuff that is talked about, and some of the dialogue that I hear, to me, those minds that produce those statements are not well informed. But here at the Umoja Circle, you're always going to see books on my tables next to me. I have a library. I believe that study required is a slow process. It's nothing quick. I don't Google everything. I use it in its proper sense for a definition of stuff, but I study, and I've been doing this for going on 40 years now, of slow study, because most of the scholars that I emulate, Malcolm studied, Marcus Garvey studied, Dr. Clark, Dr. Ivan Van Serter, Dr. Francis Cress Weldon, they all study books. You don't get anything quickly. It takes deep study, and we're losing that in today's society. I'm seeing with these quick fix, quick information that we think is informative. No, the only thing that does is a surface thing. So I'm going slow and letting you know what this. That's why people are misinterpreting what racism is, because you're going too quick and you're not doing the proper study and putting it in context and learning from various different disciplines what I'm talking about. And here we go to the next one. This is the interesting word here: semantic infiltration. What does that mean? It's the art of forcing your opponent to use your language. That's why we use racism instead of the word prejudice. Okay, when you hear somebody call a black person, well, you're being racist. That's that semantic infiltration. What happened when semantic infiltration was deliberately created in the 1970s by the State Department, and what they did was what it is a way of negotiating in which you use a term or a word to get that word put into the mix to disrupt whatever the negotiation is. So when that person is correcting you or getting frustrated because you're saying something, you see it on certain news. I'm not going to mention a news place, but they with their let's say alternate reality news or the alternate truth. They're saying things that you might say that doesn't make sense. Well, they do it deliberately to muddy the waters. And when you started using that word to debate them, and you start using their terminology, you are distracted from the main point. And that's what this is: semantic infiltration. And that's how, for the last 30 years, the term racism is starting to be used in order to talk about what is naturally in a human being, which is prejudice and biases and discrimination. And there's a reason why human beings are prejudiced and biased and discriminating. And I'll talk about that as we go along. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, just as a class system passes along the burden of past discrimination to a minority community, so too does the benefits of past favoritism. You know, are passed down to the descendants of the dominant group in that society. This is what happened in America. This is called racism, okay? It's something that is passed down. In the first show, I used a quote from Dr. Wade Nobles, who said that the experience of a first generation, like the colonial times in America, for example, and the experience of those people, you know, what happened for Thanksgiving and what happened when, you know, certain colonies were formed in the 1600s and 1700s, and also slavery was developed in the past, become the experience of those people, okay? That's in the past. That's what people say, well, that happened back then. Well, what happened is the next generation, their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, that becomes their history. That becomes their traditions, okay? And when you have these traditions, these cultural traditions of one group being dominant over native people, taking their lands, or black people enslaving them, and saying that, and using the school system to say that the people that they come from didn't develop anything, or the dark continent, or whatever mythology you use, but it's to maintain power. When you put laws like the Constitution of 1789, it says that we were just 3/5 of a human being for political reasons. So those the people in the South who own enslaved people would for every 500 slaves, for example, you get 300 votes, even though the people that you're counting don't have any right to vote. This was all manipulated. That's racism. When you have that kind of power, when you're part of the group that is privileged to use that system, and you use your prejudice to manipulate that system that way, you're being a racist. When has black people have that kind of power? When did Native Americans ever had that kind of power? So when you use the term racist, when you're talking about an individual who might be prejudiced, but does that person who have that prejudice have that power to manipulate where white population could go, where they could live, what jobs they could have, whether they consider the school a counter at Woolworths, whether they could drink from a water fountain? We never had that kind of power. So no, we can never have been racist, and we cannot be racist to this very day, okay? Because let me take the back. There are some individuals who have been conditioned by this system, like a certain Supreme Court judge that looked like me, but he's not working in the benefit of our group. He's working for the same group, okay, that dominate. So he, in a sense, he's manipulating the system, and yes, he could be racist, but it's not benefiting the group as a whole. The people that look like him is working against them, and that's part of racism, because you're going to have collaborators in your society who are going to try to maintain power or get what they can in that system of racism. And you know, that's when you're going to have people who are going to betray their own kind. Let's go on. In America today, we have inherited a house that looks nice on the outside, but whose internal structure needs a lot of fixing. And that's what I'm saying. We are told in school about this pretty house. I'm not just talking about the White House. I'm talking about the social structure we call the America the exceptional, America on the White House on the Hill, and all these things we've heard throughout the years when it comes to defining this experiment called America. But inside, the structure was built on enslavement. Its structure continues today, even though those structures of slavery and those structures of that created this society still left part of itself, I'm trying to put it in a better way, called racism, which still exists. And racism is found in the mind, and they have systems by law that people who still are part of the dominant group have the privilege to use without effort, okay? That we still have to fight those glass ceilings, and we have to fight the gatekeepers who look like the dominant group, who still control the levers of power in America. Let's go on. Today as America, we are called to examine and update a social structure called racism, built long ago. That's the thing that people don't understand. this structure was built long ago by laws. I use the example of how laws function for generations. I use the example of stopping at a red light in the last show, and I'll use it again for those of you who might be new, that we stop at a red light without even thinking. Okay, but there was a law that was passed over 100 years ago that said that you have to stop at a red light with this thing called an automobile when it was brand new. That's the founding generation, like I said. Okay, the experience of that generation who created that law know why they were doing it, because they had to experience the muddy roads and the crazy. There was no way of getting organized, and people were getting run over on country roads, so you had to organize and come to a stop. You know, between the horse-drawn carriage competing with these Model Ts. But what it did was condition you to think a certain way if you come from generations that followed. You grew into these things. You were taught from the time you were a child that you must stop at a red light to look both ways. And that's how you're conditioned, to the point where you don't even think twice about it. But if those behaviors are racist behaviors, because when you were told that a black person cannot come in your store, or you were not allowed to go in the back of the bus, in the 1950s, but you had a number of generations, hundreds of years of generation where you had that right as a white person. Okay, you wasn't taught it. It was just what you've always done. It became ingrained in the culture. That's how racism works. And we did not create that. We have to try to deal and change it. And we have to deal with this social structure that is still there, called racism. Let's go. Next one. And like any old house, which America is 240-something years old, America has many unseen issues with its foundational structure, which has now warped into the current multi-layered racial system we call racism today. It's still embedded. You can't see it. If anybody moves into an old, say, colonial house in the Northeast, they got all these old houses from the early 1900s that were good during the Gilded Age. But you ain't gonna walk in there and just set up shop. I don't think, no husband would bring his wife into a place like that, unless you on, one of those do-it-yourself shows on TV where you're getting paid to put it together. But you're gonna have to change the jobs. You gotta bring it up to the proper wirings and all these things. You got to deal with any old house. And America, we still have to deal with that foundation of racism that is part of the joist of this country. That's part of what's hidden behind the wirings of this country. That is still in the minds of the people who are privileged in this country. I'm talking about white America. You have to face this truth. You must speak truth to power. Let's go on. The next one. Let's go to what these definitions are. This is what I'm saying. This is what you mean when you call somebody racist, but this is not the same thing. Prejudice means you have a misconceived feeling based on no factual evidence involved. Yes, you don't like broccoli. There's nothing wrong with broccoli. Broccoli is a good vegetable, but you have this preconceived feeling based on no factual evidence of it. You just don't like it. That's you being prejudiced to the broccolis. Discrimination allows you to differentiate things. Okay, you discriminate. You discriminated. That's natural. These are the human thing that you say, oh, everybody's prejudiced, everybody discriminates, everybody's biased. It is a tendency to think or act in a way that favors one side over another, a person or a group of people. Every human being on earth, in order to live, must discriminate, must be biased, and must be prejudiced. That's natural. And what he means by that, back in the days of the hunter-gatherers, you going out into new lands, you got all human beings came out of Africa, okay? And when they went into the different environments, they developed the people we see today. But when you go into a new land, you're going to see something that looks like a mushroom that you remember at home, but you don't know if that's poisonous, okay? And if it is poisonous because one of your friends actually ate it and died, then you're going to be prejudiced about it. You got to develop a prejudice. That's where prejudice developed in a human being, okay? Okay, you got to be discriminating about it between that's edible and that is not edible. That's discrimination. That's where the concept of discrimination is embedded in us as human beings. And you got to be biased, okay? All those things that is but that had nothing to do with racism. Stop contracting both of them. That's that semantic infiltration that was deliberately put into the lexicon decades ago, at least since the 70s, by the conservative groups who want to maintain power and white privilege. They put these things in to muddy the waters, and they've done a good job through their talk shows and their newspapers and what you've seen. They're doing it even into their political jargon. You see them doing it to this day. But it has nothing to do, with prejudice. I like chocolate ice cream. I used to. I had to cut back with that. But I'm prejudiced against chocolate ice cream. I have this. I'm prejudiced to say from vanilla and strawberry and all these others. I have a prejudice against them. Because I like chocolate. And if I go to a store and I go past all these other types of chocolate, because I like Haagen-Dazs, for example, and I go past all these other types, Bluebell of chocolate ice, I am discriminating against those other types. And I'm being biased when I say, this is the best ice cream in the world, Haagen-Dazs, okay, compared to Bluebell and all these other types of chocolate ice cream. So those are naturally human behavior, but they're not racist. I don't have power over the ice cream industry where I can use my bias. See, that's how you become a racist individual, when you use your bias in the system that was developed for your group, okay? That's why we have laws that said we were 3/5 a human being. You had to develop a psychology that's passed on from generation to generation to do harm or control to maintain your status quo. Like I said in the early show, that ism means maintaining the status quo. When you see ism, classism, sexism, or racism. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay. Like I said, those biases, discrimination, and prejudices have nothing to do with racism. In the last 40 years or more, Black Americans have been tricked by the dominant group in American society, especially the conservative group of white Americans, into believing that anytime you show these behaviors, prejudice, discrimination, and bias, you are being racist. That is not true. But if you don't understand history, you could be easily. Whoever controls the information and images of the past will determine how you view things in your present moment. If you don't read, if you don't understand the history, if you don't see these patterns throughout history, how could you know when you're being manipulated? You cannot. So understand, that's why I say you got to study. You should. You don't have to. But if you want to understand and not be manipulated by the same system that once had owned us, they never owned us spiritually or mentally, and sometimes physically, because we ran. We had a way, first time we could do anything, we would get out of there. But then we became part of the criminal justice system, which was owned by the same dominant group. So racism is a competition between for the means of surviving in society, one group dominated over the other. And if you're not a member of that dominant group, or you are a collaborator who joined that dominant group, and you use the laws that's in your favor or in the favor of the dominant group, then you are functioning as a racist person. But when I talk about Black people, I'm talking about as a group, not in the individual thing. So that's another way they kind of mess you up, because they're going to say, well, they'll start pointing at individual. What about Clarence Thomas? What about no, it's a group dynamics, okay? It's always a group dynamics. You don't talk about an individual only when you see football games or basketball game or some sports. It is a group dynamics. It's the name on the team that the record, everybody has their own individual part in it, but it's never best one person. That's what you're taught. And the same thing with a racist system. The system was not meant for us, and that's that old house and those parts of it that still needs to be changed, to update it. We still have work to do in America. That's my point with these shows. That's what the Umoja Circle is about, correcting errors where errors are found and introducing fact where we find that so many people are working on fiction. Let's go on. Okay, America, this is a dangerous structure. You know what's going on right now with Project 2025 and all these other things that these competing political parties are going through right now. It's still because that structure that created enslavement, that it created the racist system, that created a non-compensated people, when we call enslaved people, for 246 years. And we were free, but we were economically not given any compensation for the free labor that we had that built this country. Okay, that kind of structure still exists in the minds of those who want to maintain their power, of those who are in the privileged class. And it not only mean class privilege, but race privilege. These laws were originally meant for a particular group and mostly dominated by white America. Sad but true. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Racism has been an essential part of this American structure by laws, which all Americans now occupy. Just as the studs and joists, like I said, we can't see are essential in a finished building, we call our homes. This home that we moved into with the 13th Amendment and 14th Amendment, or what Martin told Harry Belafonte in 1963, I think. He said, "I wonder if I brought my people into a burning home." When what's going on with all the riots and all the things that was going on in the 1960s, and what was going on in Montgomery, on top of the lynchings and all the stuff with the Ku Klux Klan, was I bringing my people into a burning house? He was talking about that structure, and that structure still exists. We still need fixing up. We still live in a predominantly racist system, okay? That's the truth. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, let's go on to the next one. I got a few more minutes, and racism is an artificial construction of fixed and embedded ranking of human values. And I'm gonna stop it right here, but I hope you get my point when I say that we still have to deal with racism. It is a old building with parts that needs to be changed. And if this structure is not shored up properly or reach compliance electrically or joists like any old house, it will collapse around you. Look what's almost going to be happening if you don't vote in November, okay? Who would win? And what would be lost? And what would collapse this old house? So until then, peace and vote. Hotep. Bye-bye.